Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Bid Breakfast this week. Good morning, Rob.
Good morning.
Right, let's get straight into today's session, which is about frameworks. So we're just going to quickly talk through some of the pros and cons of frameworks. We're going to keep it relatively high level just because of the time today. But first of all, Rob, as you are the better-looking, funnier one, you can play good cop today.
I'm the younger one, that's it.
I'm the younger one, yeah. Do you want to talk us through some of the pros of frameworks?
Yeah, I think frameworks are a really good opportunity for all types of organisations to get other options into the market they're in. There's a lot of frameworks out there, which we'll get onto a little bit later, but a lot of them have a minimum standard. Now, this isn't the case with all of them. There's different requirements for each framework, but many of the frameworks we've worked on, there is a minimum standard to get to, and they'll take all the bidders beyond that. That makes it a much easier market entry. Also, easier market entry are the requirements of what you actually have to submit. Now, there's usually the kind of selection questionnaire type things that we normally have to do as part of a bid. You know, make sure your accounts, your policies, all the normal stuff that you'd have for any bid are in the right place. But in terms of then what you have to answer, again, it depends on the framework, but you're looking at less method statements usually than a standard bid. And often these method statements are looking back at what you've done, showing the experience. There are a few as well that go, well, what would you do if you were awarded a job on this framework, or how would you do communication? How would you do X, Y, Z? But it's a lot less of the how you will do a specific service. So it's a little bit different. It's a little bit of a different game. But it's highly recommended if you do have a framework in the industry you're in to have a look at what's out there and look at those as other entries to markets. Because as point 2 says, the range of customers that you can have access to or can have access to you can be absolutely massive. If you look at the Crown Commercial Service frameworks, CCS, they are generally accessible to the entire public sector. All central government, local government, NHS, fire services, police services, universities, all kind of those kind of quasi-public sector bodies as well can access those frameworks. So it's absolutely massive what you could potentially have access to. So I think it's really worth what can be a relatively short investment of time and potentially money to have access to a huge framework. There's caveats to that, which Matt will get onto afterwards, but generally, it's a relatively low bar and low effort thing to get to, and I can't really understand sometimes why people aren't willing to try and go on these. Point 3, some frameworks have the potential for direct awards. I've seen that with some clients and some ex-colleagues as well, that if you've got the right reputation, if you've got the right services, the right prices, you could get a direct award from a body. It could be, it's generally lower level value for direct awards, but not always the case. If it's not a direct award, then you're looking at doing a mini competition, which could have those kind of more complicated method statements, or sometimes it can simply be, what's your price? But there is a potential to have relatively easy work through it if you've got the right presentation. Through the framework, you can create really good case studies for larger contracts. So on a framework, you might get a small job, or some small jobs. It gives a really good opportunity to have those case studies, those references as well, those referees that you need for those single supplier contracts. The other thing, and it does look quite good on organizations' websites, is when you've got that badge that shows I'm on this framework, I'm on this trusted framework. Often the Crown Commercial Service badge looks very nice with an actual crown on your website. It makes it look a lot better. So generally, I'm a very pro framework person, and I'd always encourage people to look at what's out there, what you can access, and how easy it might be to get onto. And Matt, we haven't covered this here, but we might cover it a little bit later. But obviously, there's lots of different types of frameworks, DPSs, marketplaces as well. But I shall now hand over to Bad Cop to talk about the cons.
Well, just before we get onto the cons, there's just a couple of things I've noted down there actually that are probably worth saying. And I think when you were talking around that kind of minimum standard, Rob, and quite often it's less to write than a bit. Not always. I mean, we've worked on some very complicated frameworks where it's been huge amounts of responses, and it's probably more complicated than some of the tenders we've worked on. But we're kind of talking in general terms here. But in general terms, I think there's a greater chance of success with a framework. So, you know, if you compare this against a kind of winner takes all tender, because often it is, you know, minimum or acceptable standard, there is a greater chance of being successful. And I think that's one of the things that we find, which then sort of leads on to the next point, which is for a lot of people that we talk to, they quite often say we don't have experience, and Robbie kind of touched on this in point 4. We don't have experience to go for this tender. Well, frameworks are a great opportunity for market entry. So if you are new to the market or you are a small business, and we've worked with a few people like this, where their entire strategy is to bid for frameworks and maximize the potential from them, because they are kind of caught in that middle ground where they're sort of slightly bigger than a one-man band, but they're not big enough to compete with the big boys. So they know that if they can go into the competitive tendering area, the big boys will win. So there's no point because they know they can't win. Whereas frameworks, quite often people will get on a framework and then just forget about it and think the work will come to them. But the businesses we've worked with that have been really successful have got onto a framework and then assigned a framework manager or a sales manager and really pushed hard through that. Because essentially, as you've already said, Rob, it's that kind of route to customers. And that's what's really important there. So it is a selling mechanism. And then you've kind of already just finished off with this. But of course, when we say frameworks, we do mean DPS as well, and marketplaces. But DPS, and the most important thing about those is that they are generally, and unless they're in the last few months, they are always available for entry. So if there is a DPS out there that's in your sector, and some of this stuff makes sense to you, that you're small or smaller, you don't have experience, you're looking to get into a market, this potentially could be an area to look at. So now we've gone through all the sunshine, let's get on to the thunder and lightning. I've sort of just touched on this first point previously, which is quite often people will get onto a framework and then think the work will come to them. And sometimes it does, but quite often you really need to work hard at generating business through a framework. There is no guaranteed work. And when I say often, probably 98, 99% of the time, there will be a very clear line in the documentation that says there is no guaranteed volume, there is no guaranteed pricing. It is what it is. So I think if you are going to do this, one of the things just to guard against is that you don't think the journey ends when you get the letter to say, well done, you're on the framework. That's where the sales journey and the business development journey starts. And you really need somebody that's good at that kind of relationship management, working with the framework manager at the other end, pushing your own customers through that framework as well. There are frameworks where we've worked on where there have been questions around how will you promote this framework. I know we've probably worked on at least half a dozen of those type responses, Rob. And again, you know, you were talking about maybe the kind of backwards looking questions, and one of the ones that we see a lot of is what's your account management function for this, and what team will you put on it, what's the value of that team, how will you work with us. So I think with all this stuff, there will be direct award in some cases, there will be mini comps that are pushed to you, but don't kind of sit there and rest on your laurels thinking you've cracked it. There's a lot of hard work that needs to happen after that. And that might be someone else who's different in the business. It could be, you know, if you've got a sales team, it might be someone in marketing, it might be an ops person, but you need somebody to go and get the work through that framework. One of the other things is there are often multiple providers, and that sort of links back to the no guaranteed work. So often there is high competition in cases like this. So what you tend to find is that even with mini comps, there might be 5, 6, 7 people bidding for the same piece of work. So again, don't fall into that trap of we're on the framework, the work will come to us. What you've got to get to a position of is understanding which pieces of work best for you through the framework. So it is still competitive. You've still got to get to that point of winning the work for the mini competitions. So you've got to keep that mindset of competition. One of the other things just to touch on is framework fees. So sometimes there are framework fees, sometimes there aren't. It will be very clear on the documentation when you read it if there is a framework fee. Quite often we have seen a percentage of your invoices as a fee. Other times there is a flat fee. I think the most we've seen recently is 3%. Often it's 1%. Somewhere between that 1 and 3 is probably what we see most of the time. The important thing there is whether you can manage that fee within your current margin or whether you need to include that fee in your pricing. But the thing to really guard against is that you don't put pricing in that when you have to pay the fee makes it unprofitable for you. So even though there's a lot of documentation, often with frameworks, make sure that somebody reads it. And even if you just search on fees, on levy, whatever words, probably words you want to search, make sure that happens. Quite often, and we've seen this a lot in construction, so the commoditized type things as well. So maybe printing, some IT stuff. Quite often, things are very, very price sensitive. So it might be 70, 80, 90, 100% on price. We've seen some recently where it is 100% on price. There may be a couple of quality questions, but they're not scored. Some of this stuff, again, is race to the bottom in terms of pricing. So if you aren't that kind of company and you are someone that offers a little bit more and you can't get the cheapest price, then be aware of what that looks like for the framework. So you might get onto a framework and then you might not win anything because you can't compete on price. So you've got to kind of understand that at the start, is whether this is the right framework for you. The final thing here is really important, and this is where a lot of people get frustrated. There's a lot of wasted time, and there are multiple frameworks for the same product or service. I've lost count of the amount of times we have worked for a client of ours on one particular framework, and then 6 months later they give us a call and say there's another framework for the same thing, but it's a different procurement body or framework management company that are running it. For some sectors, I mean, the NHS, construction, FM, there are duplicate frameworks available, and it's very difficult to know which ones you need to be on. Most of them, as Rob said, are available to all public sector organisations. Now, whilst that might seem relatively straightforward, some organisations will only have signed off certain frameworks to buy through. So even though you are on one over here, that might not be on their list of approved frameworks. So then you're kind of stuck. And even though they can use it because they're open to all public sector organisations, it's then a job at their end to be able to approve that framework for buying through. So it's not always as easy as it seems when we say most big frameworks are available to any public sector organisation. So you've really got to be careful about assessing the number of frameworks and DPS out there, which ones are available to your customers, which ones you want to push customers through, and where new customers might want to buy. So I think that's probably the biggest thing for me in terms of directing resource effectively, is making sure if it's 1, 2, 3 frameworks that you go for, that you will actually generate work through them. Otherwise, it's a complete waste of money. And over the years, there have been a lot of people that we have worked with where they've got on the wrong framework and they've spent, whatever their bid cost is, 5, 10, 15, 20 grand, getting onto the framework to be told it's not the right one. So I think that is the one big tip I would say take away from today, is get the list of all the ones that are appropriate for your sector. Have a look at them all, and then work out which ones are going to be most effective for generating business for your organisation. Rob, you are back.
Yeah, I thought I'd heard a rumble a couple of minutes ago, and then the power went. So, yeah.
And was it a storm?
There is a storm around at the moment. But there you go. That's exciting.
That makes me feel a whole load better.
Well, that's because we had 40-degree heat today. So yeah.
Well, completely aside from this, we've actually got blue sky and it's nearly 15 degrees today, so I feel much better.
And also, I thought it was good that it could happen whilst you were talking. So
yeah, I pretty much just got to the end of the cons. The kind of one thing that I was just spending a little bit of time on was that kind of multiple frameworks or the duplication of frameworks where, there's a lot of frustration, particularly with the clients that we work with. I don't know if there's any plans to rationalize those frameworks. I guess there's some perverse incentives to keep them out there.
I think, I don't think there's any reason that organisations would do that. To be honest, what would be good is if you can find out the money that's gone through them, because that's your best. That's your best idea, and who's using them. So if you can find out that, let's say you do facilities management stuff in East Anglia, well, are organisations in East Anglia actually using that framework for the services that you provide? So that's not easy to find. I think there are some platforms out there that can get into that detailed information, but finding information about framework call-offs and direct awards is not as transparent as maybe it should be. So you've probably got to go digging into quite a few holes to find that out.
Yep. Okay. Now you are back and safe from the storm. Shall we move on to the first of the interesting opportunities?
Yes, of course. So I think all these interesting opportunities we put up are all with Crown Commercial Services. So just a tip for people out there: if you go on the Crown Commercial Services website, it has a lovely list of what agreements are currently live, what's coming up, dates, all the procurement documents, the suppliers that are already on there. There's lots of information. So I do recommend people go to their website to find out more anyway, regardless of what industry you're in, because there's loads for different types of industries. But the first one we got up here is Technology Products and Associated Services 3, which is very catchy, usually abbreviated to TPAS. Now, this will be the third incarnation of it. It's for suppliers of hardware, software, and associated IT services for all the public sector. Now, it's currently at market engagement stage. There's a few documents floating around. I haven't seen any events relating to it yet, but I wouldn't be surprised if there are some events later this year where CCS will tell people more about what they're looking for. This is anticipated to come out in January 2027. Now, Matt, I think both of us worked with clients on the previous incarnation of TPAS, and I think, and you can check on the website, I think we're talking about 20 to 30 suppliers per lot. There were specialist lots for like education hardware, healthcare hardware. What they're going to do this time, I don't know whether it's going to be more general or sector specific, so it's worth keeping an eye on. But let's say you are a specialist provider of hardware or software to the education sector. This is a really good specific framework that you might want to be looking at. But very recommended for anyone in that IT space. And I think it's one of the best frameworks for suppliers specifically of hardware, because there's lots of other frameworks out there that are related to software or cloud support, like G Cloud, which has recently passed. The second one on there is a lovely general one, consultancy and professional services. This is replacing management consultancy framework MCF4. So this is essentially the fifth incarnation of this framework. It is for almost any type of consultancy services to the public sector. If you are in the consultancy, management consultancy, specialist consultancy space, this is worth looking at and getting onto. There is an online event that you can register for as a supplier on the 3rd of March, and the whole bid's anticipated to come out in September 2026. So if you're in that space, look on the CCS website for more information, consider signing up to that event and get your ducks in a row ready for September.
Did you say there was an event just gone this week, Rob, for that one?
Yesterday. Yeah, so there may be slides. I don't know if there'll be a recording, but there may be some details.
One of the things about CCS frameworks is that the evaluation system is very clear to understand. So particularly with some of these like TPAS, it generally tends to be 0, 25, 50, 75, 100, or 0, 33, 66, 100. And they're very clear on what you need to achieve for each one of those scores. So our experience of this is generally that it is, so long as you've got the experience and the evidence, it is relatively straightforward to score highly on those, because they are very, very clear about what you need to do to achieve 100 or the next mark down. So even though there's a lot of, and the CCS ones tend to be big in terms of response, there's a lot of fiddling around, and not in a negative way, but you just got to kind of know what you're doing these things. They are probably one of the easier ones to achieve the high marks because of the clarity of the evaluation. So even though it's a lot of work, I would say it's worth having a look again.
Don't waffle. Stick to play the game with the marking system, even more so than a normal bid, I would say, with CCS.
Yeah, and I think generally our experiences, they've been pretty fair in the way that they've marked things. I mean, there's always been the odd thing here or there, but generally I think they have been fair. Where you followed the guidance, they have scored it reasonably well.
And I think fair for SMEs as well. Sorry, just another point on that. Although some of these frameworks you might look at and go, oh, there aren't that many suppliers on there. And I think sometimes that's because SMEs think, well, that's not for us. Well, we know from experience we've got SMEs onto these frameworks. They've scored very well and they've got decent work out of it.
And I think part of that comes back to what I was sort of saying very badly, Rob, which was that at first glance they look quite big in terms of the response you've got to produce, because there's lots of screens, there's lots of questions, and quite often a lot of the questions you can answer quite quickly if you know how to answer them, where to look, even how to navigate the portal. But at first glance, it scares a lot of people away. And then you're kind of in that position of there's not many suppliers. Okay, let's just move on to the last three for today. And as Rob said, this is just a selection we've pulled out because they were interesting. There's plenty more on the CCS website and other websites as well who manage frameworks. So the next one is clinical and non-clinical temporary and permanent staff. So big recruitment framework. Again, potentially it's available to all public sector bodies to buy through. That is anticipated to be out this summer. For anybody that supplies clinical and non-clinical staff, this is definitely one to have a look at. We have had very good success for our clients with this, and they've done a lot of business through it afterwards. Again, there are a couple of other frameworks that almost duplicate this. So if you are going to look at this, make sure this is the right one for you. The next one, different sector again, is FM. This is a DPS, so that's currently open. And I think, Rob, is this one the one that's been extended? It's currently
it's been extended for another year to February.
Yeah. So February 29, so there's still plenty of time for people. There's 3 years left to run on that. And as we sort of touched on previously, this is something that you can access now. You don't need to wait until the end of the framework, until there's a new entry point. You will be able to go and find this DPS, download the papers, and apply now. So for anybody that's interested in this one, you don't need to wait. It's something you can action straight away. Again, massive marketplace for providers. What that does is give anyone in the public sector visibility of your business and your services. It includes a massive amount of things in there. So catering, cleaning, help desk, all the other things that are on the screen there. It is a very interesting one to have a look at.
The only bit I didn't put on the slide was that there are also some defence specific kind of not lots, but areas. So for organisations that have security clearance, there's almost another layer of options there.
Yeah. Okay. And the final one that we've just pulled out for today is Construction Works and Associated Services 3. So this is a closed framework. So again, it's UK public sector buying quite a large range of construction works and services. This is going to cover construction and building works, civils, repairs, real estate. There's some really interesting things in there. Architecture, engineering inspection services, prefab buildings, modular and portable. Now, we've worked on a lot of modular stuff over the years, and again, this is a duplication of other frameworks.
I think this will be the fourth framework in the last couple of years we know that has modular on it.
Yeah. So again, this comes with a big dose of caution of make sure if you are going to look at this, this is one for you and your customers are happy to use it. The ITT should open late March, and interestingly, they've even given a time period for the ITT, which they have suggested is 8 weeks. The anticipated award is December this year. So that's another one that is imminent. I think those are the kind of 5 that we thought kind of covered different sectors that may be of interest to people. I am desperately waiting for the framework relating to potholes for UK roads, which
that might be on construction. Oh no, there's probably a road maintenance one that might. Honestly, there probably is one coming out.
I think there needs to be a separate one for potholes at the moment because there's very little in the way of road left and lots of hole. So hopefully somebody is on that one pretty sharpish.
I just wanted to take the opportunity very quickly, because we have made it on CCS, but just to let people know a few more providers of frameworks that have big sets of frameworks. NEPO is one. That's not mainly Northeast related frameworks. ESPO, that does a lot of construction and FM. CPC, which often does educational related frameworks. You've got NHS Shared Business Services, which is unsurprisingly NHS stuff. That's mainly support and infrastructure stuff for the NHS rather than clinical. Health Trust Europe, which is a lot around tech, workforce, estates relating to the healthcare sector. And then there's 3 other providers, very construction and infrastructure focused, which is Scape, Fusion 21, and the National Framework Partnership. There are lots more out there, which also goes to show, going back to one of your points, Matt, that the amount of confusion around different providers and what you should be doing.
Yeah. Did you mention NHS SBS in that list as well?
Yeah.
You did. Right. I was just making a couple of points on my pad here. So I think just before we kind of move on to the last news item, which isn't that interesting today, I think the biggest thing I would say is make friends with the framework manager at the other end, in the most professional sense of that. As I said those words, it all sounds really wrong. But have a relationship with that framework manager at the other end. Because that is the one thing that will really help you in terms of generating business. And that really should be focused on understanding what the buying plans are. Now, with the Procurement Act and the publication of pipelines and intention to buy stuff and all those kind of new notices, it's a lot easier to have a picture of what's coming down the line. So have regular meetings with the framework manager at the other end. Be open to pushing your own customers through there if it works for everybody. Obviously, framework managers have got a vested interest in keeping that framework going, driving revenue through it. So if you can push customers their way, they're very happy for that to happen. That keeps the relationship going. So I think that would be the main thing, is don't sit back, make sure you've got somebody proactive managing that framework. We are pretty much there. Any final points to you, Rob?
I could talk about frameworks a lot more, but we're good for them. Yeah.
Fine. Well, we'll just briefly touch on this. It's, as I said, it's not massively interesting and it's not new news, but over the weekend there was all the various news on tariffs. I think this is just an interesting one in terms of pricing. So people who, particularly for products, are in a bit of a dilemma about what to do with their pricing at the moment. Some services as well, potentially. But I think particularly for people who are trading with products, this is a really interesting thing to watch. And I think we'll do a whole series on this around how to protect against future changes, where margins need to be. But I think this is definitely one that people need to have a look at. And I would recommend just running a few scenarios on what your pricing looks like, given 10%, 15%, no tariffs. So I don't know if something else you want to say on that one.
No, I think there's particular sectors that can hit. I think construction, FM, even catering, for the cost of food, cleaning, anything relies on a product rather than your skill in your head. So for us, it doesn't affect us because we write things. But for anyone that has a supply chain that they're relying upon, that's where you need to take notice. And actually, frameworks can lock in prices, so that's something else you've got to take into account.
Yeah, I think that's probably the link here, is that often once you have got onto a framework, the price is fixed plus or minus inflation for the period. So that's maybe a good way of having one mitigation against price changes. Right, we are 2 minutes over time, mainly because of the slight technical issue to start with, of being a minute late and the live stream not working, lightning in Australia, and you being close to death.
Yeah,
it has. So hopefully we will see everybody in 2 weeks' time, same time, 8:30 on a Wednesday, and the actual date is the 11th of March. So we will see you all then.
Cheers.